Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today we are on the test server and we are going to be taking a look at all these new champions that were just added to the game, and there's some real doozies in here, so you're going to want to know exactly what the skills are, where you're going to want to be able to use them. So this video is going to be an overview, right? I'm not going to dive too in deep. I'm not going to be showing any footage of like using them in particular areas. We're going to be doing that over the next week or so, trying them in different spots and highlighting different ways you can use these new champions, and I think there's some really cool ones in here. But what I want to do today is just kind of go over their kits, understand exactly what they are and where they can be used, and kind of get an idea of, oh, maybe this champion's going to be good in this spot or that spot, and have an understanding of that. I haven't had a lot of time to actually test these champions as yet, but it's pretty easy when you look at a champion's kit to get an idea of where they can be good, where they will be useful for you in this game. So I'm excited by a bunch of these. There's some really good ones in here. So I figure we can go ahead and let's jump in and see what champions are what. So like I said, we got a bunch of new champions in here, and we're going to start with Raqqa Viletide. She's an HP based, she's a support champion, I should say, for the orcs. Pretty sure it's kind of one of those weird things, right, where she's a damage is based off of attack, even though most of her stuff is based off of HP. So this already is starting off on a bad note, but this is one of the few champions that I'm a little bit more questionable on than the others. But anyway, A1 attacks an enemy, heals ally with the lowest HP by 10% of this champion's max HP. I think you build this as a support champion, and what ends up happening is she keeps your team alive, and I think she'll be really good at that. A2 ability removes all debuffs from all allies, then places increased attack buff and shield buff equal to 25% of this champion's max HP on all allies for 2 turns. This is a nice strong ability. If you can build her with enough HP, that could be a very large shield. Not to mention the increased attack buff is always really good, especially when you consider, you know, using her in something like Arena, where I think there could be a nice spot for her there. And then a 3 ability is revive all dead allies with 50% HP and 50% turn meter, then places block debuff on all allies for 2 turns, and will place a block debuff even if there's no dead allies. That means this skill can be used all the time. That's both a good and a bad thing, right? Sometimes you want a champion to wait to use this skill until she actually can revive people. This is kind of an issue you can run into with like Ursula the Mourner, where she'll use her revive skill to place the strengthen buff on everybody, even though you want her to wait to actually revive. So there's a pro and a con to this, but a revive on a 4-turn cooldown, it's an AoE revive as well, is actually really strong. We don't see that very often here. I think Duchess might be one of the few other champions that can do this. The block debuffs is a great addition to that, and when you consider that she has a cleanse on her kit as well, that's a pretty strong kit that she's got going on here. Her passive ability is really nice too. Start of each turn fills the turn meter of all allies by 10%. That's a pretty significant little passive boost that you're getting. And then the passive effect, that's the active effect of it. Passive effect, at the start of each turn, places a continuous heal buff on the ally with the lowest HP for 2 turns, not place a continuous heal buff on this champion. So basically what's happening is every other turn that creep passive ability is active, and then at the start of every turn she's continuous healing somebody. So she's going to be a really good champion for keeping your teams alive. I think she's going to actually have some decent usage as a defensive champion, like a arena defensive champion, I guess is how you would say it, right? Where if you consider she's going to remove buffs from your allies, she's going to revive them if they go down and block debuffs even if they don't. She's going to heal them with her A1. She's going to heal them with her passive ability, turn meter boost everybody. There can be a lot of really good usage for her, I can see in this game. So I like Raqqa, and I think she's a solid champion. I don't think she's going to be crazy good, but definitely is a good champion, and actually a really good addition for the orcs, who do not have any great revivers and do not have a lot of healing within that faction. This is actually a really needed addition for the faction itself. Also has a nice speed aura in all battles by 19%. Can never go wrong with that. And then next on the list is the fusion champion himself. I'm talking about Lanatharil. Now, Lanatharil, I don't think is going to be one of those champions that everybody's going to have to go out and fuse right away. Just doesn't really scream that to me, but does appear to be a very good champion overall, I would say. We can see his A1 ability here. Decrease target max HP by 30% of the damage inflicted, and places a shield buff equal to 10% of the champion's max HP for 2 turns on the ally with the lowest HP. Solid, right? decreased max HP, and a shield. This is obviously a scarab killing champion. That's the idea behind him anyway, right? An 8-2 ability is attacks all enemies, place a shield buff on all allies for 3 turns equal to 20% of this champion's max HP. If there's any dead allies, places a shield buff on all allies for 3 turns equal to 30% of this champion's max HP instead. And this buff cannot be removed, stolen, transferred, spread, or have its duration increased or decreased by enemies or allies. Essentially, this guy's going to be able to solo Scarab and do a great job of that. You just put 4 pieces of food in there with him to get through the waves and die quickly, and all of a sudden he's going to have a shield on all the time that cannot be removed and cannot be stolen, and it's going to be it's going to be really solid. It's just going to be on him for the full fight. I think that's pretty spectacular right there. And then he's going to decrease that max HP with his A1 skill. Now his A3 places an increased crit damage buff on all allies for 2 turns, then teams up with all allies to attack a single enemy. This is really cool because now you have another ally attack champion here. This one, however, is HP based, so he makes for a very interesting combination with everybody else. The increased crit damage, of course, is really nice. You're getting more damage out of it as well. There's a lot of strong potential with this champion in a variety of areas simply because of that. Passive ability inflicts more damage against targets under shield buffs. This obviously is a nod to arena potential here. There's a lot to like. Aurora is a 35% HP aura in Doom Tower battle. So how does this work, right? I think very clearly this guy's going to be able to solo Scarab by himself, right? You just got to make sure he stays alive as long as he can heal himself up enough. But he's also giving himself a massive shield to absorb a lot of the damage he's taking. So, a few immortal sets could probably do it. A regen set obviously could. And it shouldn't be too hard for him to survive and really take down the Scarab all by himself. Might be a longer battle, but he should be able to do it. All you need to do is give him one champion that dies and doesn't come back, because then the shield that he puts on himself won't drop off ever, right? Not to mention his A1 is going to be giving himself a shield every time he attacks because he'll be the only champion alive. So definitely some really strong potential there with HP base. And then of course you have this ally attack thing, right? And this obviously is really nice because you're going to get a lot more damage out of it. Now, the other part of him, I think, like I'm saying, great for Scarab, but doesn't mean he's not going to be great for other areas of this game as well, right? If we think about something like Hydra, a 3-turn shield for 30% of his max HP is massive. As soon as one of your champions gets eaten, all of a sudden he's going to make it a lot easier for the rest of your 5 champions to stay alive longer. In addition to that, it's going to be a nice shield even if nobody gets eaten, right? And it's going to stay on your team for a long time too. So there's a lot of protection going on in there, which I think is really strong for his kit. Not to mention the crit damage, obviously more damage for everybody, but the ally attack ability is what's really, really strong there. So you can use this guy, I think, in any progression you want, whether it's going from you're going up the progression in dragons or ice golems, fire knight, even probably not best there, but you could with the ally attack ability if you can time it right. Even something like spiders, he's going to help keep your entire team alive with those really big shields of his. So there's a lot to like about this guy. I think he's going to be a very solid champion. I do not look at him and say this is a must fuse type of champion. I'm pretty sure most accounts will be able to do all the content without him, right? I don't see him in that kind of a vein, but what I do see is that if you do fuse him, he's going to be useful for you no matter where in the game you are, right? Many people that are even end game are using single champions to solo Scarab. He can probably replace them. Not that you need to, but he could, and my guess is probably do even a better job. And it's an arguable point, right? We'll see as we test him out more, but this guy is going to be a solid champion for you to fuse. Nothing I'd break the bank for, but if you're taking stock of your resources, it shouldn't be too hard to get him. All right, next on our list is Theodore the Savant. This champion I'm really excited about. First off, looks super cool, right? I'm like, oh man, it's like some creepy horror movie type of guy. But what do we have going on? We've got A1, attacks all enemies, decreased speed debuff gets placed 50% of the time. I love decreased speed. I'm really liking it, especially for Hydra. I think this guy has a good future here, and defensive based champion. Makes it really easy to let him survive and do some damage. A2 ability. chance of placing 2 poison debuffs and a poison sensitivity debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, and places an increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. I think that's actually really interesting. Depending on how hard this guy hits, he actually could be pretty solid for things like clan boss, but I think more importantly, he's going to be really good for dungeons, right? When you can get increased speed, that's great. When you can put poisons out, that's always strong for dungeons, and the decreased speed as well. So this makes for like dungeon waves and dungeon bosses. I think there's a lot to like there. And then of course we get to his A3, increases the duration of all poison debuffs and HP burn debuffs on all enemies by 1 turn, then instantly activates any poison debuffs and HP burn debuffs on each enemy. Also places a weaken debuff for 2 turns on enemies not under poison or HP burn debuffs. This is going to be broken. I mean, you're about to see, and I guarantee this, you're going to see some of the ultimate fastest spider times, because if you can combine him and Sissia, all of a sudden you got 2 AoE HP burn activations, and you're going to get spider times under 10 seconds. I'm pretty sure there's a video out there for that already, so make sure to go check those out. I'm sure I'll be putting one out in a day or two, but this guy looks broken in that sense. The cool part, I think, is the fact that while he may not be placing AoE HP burn, but he can activate it, can activate those poisons. He's got the decreased speed, he's got the increased speed. He's going to be great for Hydra, but he's also going to be great for any kind of dungeon progression, and that is really nice. His passive ability too increases resistance by 5 for each poison debuff on the enemy team. I mean, that's cool. It's not a game breaker for me. I don't see that being super significant, quite frankly. The place I'd really want the resistance is in Hydra, and that's not really going to be a factor. This might be really good though for some of the Doom Tower bosses, especially the ones with ads. If you're able to get multiple poisons out there, then that can help with his resistance in that. And then his aura is an increased accuracy for all battles by 50. That can be really useful in the right situation. It's a little bit low as 50, but it's still something that can be really useful for you. I really like Theodore the Savant. I feel like there's some fun utility you can mix with this guy. Probably not game breaking for anybody, but if you pull him, I think there could be a lot of fun with it. As far as books, he only requires 9 of them. In this game, that's actually pretty good. Or is it 9 or 10? No, it's only 9 books. So that's a pretty reasonable amount these days, where we need more books for more things. But for a legendary, that's not too shabby. And then we've got Snick Track, excuse me. I really love this look, this like white, God, what is he, a hedgehog? Porcupine? I think that's got to be the deal here with all those spikes coming off of him. I really like the look though. It's very cool, and the double maces is pretty dope as well. Now he's got this A1 Misery Morningstar. Attack one enemy, 50% chance placing decreased attack, but if they're under a leash debuff, becomes 100% chance to place that for 2 turns. So decreased attack on the A1, always good. That does book up to 60% chance, even without them being under leech. That's still pretty solid for an A1 skill. Definitely that automatically makes him useful for clan boss as well as many other areas in this game. His A2 ability attacks all enemy, 75% chance, does book up to 100% chance of placing decreased speed for 2 turns. Again, we know how important decreased speed is when it comes to things like Hydra, when it comes to dungeon runs. Just makes everything easier when you can take more turns, the enemy takes less. Places a shield buff on all allies equal to 30% of this champion's max HP for 2 turns. The shield buff cannot be removed if it is placed when there are enemies under leech debuff. So that's great, right? Unremovable shield. This kind of makes him pretty good for Scarab, actually. Maybe not the best champion for it, but an unremovable shield is always really nice. Definitely good for Hydra, because that means the heads aren't going to steal that off of you. So there's a lot of potential there. This is an HP skill. He's an HP champion. So that means that, you know, there's synergy within that part of his kit. And then his A3 places an ally protection buff on all allies for 2 turns, except for this champion, right? And then also places a reflect damage buff on all allies for 2 turns, then heals this champion by 50% of their max HP. This is a really nice ability. I'm not a huge fan of reflect damage, right? It's going to be really good against Fire Knight, and I feel like there's definitely some potential if you're struggling against Fire Knight, breaking that shield, where he could be crucial for that. With the heal, with his personal heal, with the ally protection, with the shield that he places, and the debuffs that he brings, he is kind of an ideal Fire Knight champion, right? You've got decreased speed, decreased attack and on the A1, you've got decreased speed on the A2, and you've got that massive shield, as well as this ally protection, reflect damage. A lot of stuff to like right there. The interesting thing with his passive ability, whenever an ally under reflect damage buff is attacked, places a leech debuff on the attacker for 1 turn. So there you get the leech synergy, right? And reflects 50% of the damage this champion receives back to the attacker. Increases the amount of damage reflected by 20% from reflect damage buffs placed by this champion. This last part of the tooltip is wrong. It's actually placed by allies. So it doesn't increase the damage reflected by 20%. If it's on this champion, it increases the damage reflected by 20% if somebody else reflects the damage, right? Or places reflect damage. So this is something to keep in mind. That part's a little bit off, but regardless, I feel like he does bring a lot to the table. Now, reflect damage isn't generally great for a lot of the stuff that we do in this game, but it does add a little bit of damage. It is very good for Fire Knight as well. It's not very useful for Clan Boss. It just doesn't deal a lot of damage. It's not really worth it because it reflects the damage before that passive ability, the Demon Lord, that ramps up the damage so much. So it's not actually reflecting very much damage. So it kind of keep that part in mind where the reflect damage isn't going to be useful there. But he does bring decreased attack. He does bring leech for you, and he does bring ally protection. So he's still, I think, a useful Clan Boss champion for you, just not an ideal one for that. He's going to be more useful for you in Hydra. It's going to be more useful for you in Doom Tower specifically, and for dungeon runs, I think. Okay, those are the legendaries. Now we got some epics here. We've got Wuji, another Shadowkin champion. She's got a weaken debuff on the A1 for 2 turns, and will target all enemies instead of one when counterattacking with this skill. That's something to keep in mind here. This does book up to a 50% chance, but an AoE weaken on the A1 is very solid. And remember, it's a single target skill, which means it's probably going to hit considerably harder than a typical AoE skill. So making that turn into an AoE ability is really nice. A2 ability attacks all enemies, 55% chance of placing block debuffs for 2 turn. That books up to a 75% chance. I don't like 75% chance things. It's not my favorite, but as an AoE skill, that's not so bad. You should be hitting 3 out of every 4 enemies or so. So it's not a bad skill, just not my favorite. 4-turn cooldown though is very long, so also something to keep in mind. And then Shinobi Arts. This actually books to a 3-turn cooldown, which is kind of weird with the A2 being a 4-turn, but places perfect veil buff and counterattack on this champion for 2 turns. So perfect veil is good, means she's not being targeted, but counterattack's not as good because it means you want her to be targeted. It's a very interesting and kind of a mismatch of a kit. I'm honestly not a fan. Now, it doesn't mean that she can't hit hard or won't be useful for you. I don't think that's the case at all. But what I do think is weird is, the fact that you have these kind of mixed abilities here. Now, obviously, where this champion is going to be useful for and probably is designed for is Hydra, right? You got an AoE weaken ability, right? You've got a block buffs AoE as well, and you've got perfect veil combined with the counterattack. Definitely makes her somebody that I think is designed for Hydra. But there's some negatives with that, right? You're placing 2 individual buffs just on her, which means she's going to be a target for the Mischief Head, and you do not want to give Mischief Head counterattack. That is a terrible thing. So if you can keep block buffs up, it's not so bad, but it's definitely going to be a little dicey, and chances are that's going to be stolen quite a bit. So you got to be a little bit careful with that. And building her with resistance, I think could be pretty dicey. So not really what I'd call my favorite of champions here. Probably somebody that, well, I'll put it this way. There's smarter people out there that will figure out how to use her. It will not be me in all likelihood. No. Then we have Galaguirna. And she's this interesting orc champion. I think the look is actually really cool. I like the headdress, quite frankly. Got flames on her head, nothing wrong with that. But she's kind of an interesting champion, right? Attack-based champion. So A1 attacks 2 times. Increase attack buff on this champion for 2 turns if it kills an enemy. I hate those kind of kill an enemy conditional skills, not usually very good. A2 ability, AoE, and places decreased attack debuff. It does book up to 100%, so that's definitely solid skill, right? You can always use decreased attack. A3 ability, 75% books up to 100, chance of placing block buffs as well as block active skills for 2 turn, and this attack is always critical. So there's some interesting things going on here, right? Having an always critical skill is nice, but to take advantage of that means you're not building critical rate on your other skills. I mean, otherwise you're not really taking advantage of it. Block buffs is great. Block active skills is great. This is kind of something like Basher would do. So there's definitely some usage in Arena, definitely as like a cheap warlord type of champion. I can see that being a solid ability, but in order for those kind of champions to really succeed, you need them generally to be able to go first, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge generally too. So I'm not sure if this is, there's a lot of really great synergy going on here. Passive ability revives a random ally by 50% HP every time this champion kills an enemy. So it's an epic champion, so we know the multipliers aren't going to be god tier. I do not think this is a champion that's really great. This is also a single target, this A3. I just not in love with this champion. I don't see anything here that really makes her particularly useful. AoE decreased attack is great, but the A1 is nothing special. The A3 is nothing special. My guess is if you pull this champion, you're either feeding her or sending her straight to the vault. Obviously, we'll test her and see, but my guess is she's a no-go. And then that takes us to Carlina. Carlinia. It's a better name. I like that. Carlinia. No offense to the Carlinas out there. We got more candles, guys. I don't know. I think J Gigs might be a little bit, I don't know if he's going to be upset or excited, but we got more candles coming in. Anyway, Carlina's kind of an interesting champion. She's got A1, places an HP burn debuff. That's solid. 60% chance when booked. I'll take that on an A1 skill, right? A2, AoE, attack all enemies, places a decreased attack debuff. It's 55% chance that does book up to a 75% chance. Again, not my favorite thing. And it cannot be resisted by targets under HP burn. So if you can combine her with an HP burn champion, all of a sudden that becomes considerably better. Books down a 3-turn cooldown. A3 ability here decreases the duration of all debuffs on all allies by 1 turn, and then places a strengthen buff on all allies by 2 turns. For 2 turns. Now it's the 15% strengthen, not the 25, which I think is kind of interesting on an epic champion. It's not really my favorite. This buff cannot be stolen or removed. That part's great. Nothing wrong with that. So it's kind of like a mini cleanse on a 4-turn cooldown. Not really anything I'm getting excited over. Passive ability, every time an enemy on an HP burn debuff gets a turn, decreases the duration of 2 random buffs on that enemy by 1 turn. I mean, this is fine. I think what this can be used for, first off, I don't like this champion. I don't think she's going to be great. But where I think this can be used for is this passive ability specifically in Hydra. And the reason why is we use HP burn a lot there. And often buffs are spread around or whatever, right? So being able to reduce the duration of those random buffs every time an enemy under an HP burn gets a turn, that means that she's going to be stripping buffs pretty regularly. That's the one thing that I think could be really useful about this champion. In general, not a huge fan. I mean, AoE decreased attack is definitely good for that. HP burn on the A1, definitely good for that. Adding strengthen for everybody is cool, and reducing the duration of debuffs is great. So like all these things are useful. I just don't see them being exceptional, and definitely not to the point where I'm excited about this champion. That said, I can see, coming up with some nice builds that can really utilize this passive and the rest of her kit to be pretty strong. So there's some potential there for it to be good. It's just not my favorite in the world here. Ally resists in all battles by 35. Great. All right, little extra resist. I will take that. Now we get to the champion I'm probably most excited about, because I feel like there's going to be some weird usage out of this one that I always love weird champions, right? So we got Anaker. Now Anaker, attack-based champion, okay? My guess is probably not a very hard-hitting champion. So A1, AoE, and then heals ally with the lowest HP by 10% of the damage inflicted. Cool. Nothing wrong with that. All right, AoE skills are great. A2 removes a random debuff from all allies, then increases the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn. This books down a 3-turn cooldown. So we have a buff extender, a new buff extender with a 3-turn duration, and then Sacred Trust fully heals a target ally, then places increased crit rate and increased crit damage on all allies for 2 turns. This is a 4-turn cooldown, which is less good, but let's look at this, right? He increases the duration of buffs, so that means once this gets placed, it's going to be extended, so it'll actually be for 3 turns. And he's giving increased crit rate and crit damage to all your allies. So there's definitely some interesting combinations you can do here with this, right? And I think in that sense, this could be a really interesting champion to bring into certain teams. So, for example, maybe you use Godseeker in Neri, maybe you use Sandlash Survivor for one of your clan boss teams. All of a sudden now you could use Anaker instead. And what that's going to do do is he's going to be able to give you those increased crit rate, that increased crit damage buff on top of just the buff extension part of it, right? So there's some interesting synergy there. Now, the negative part is obviously this skill is one of the strong skills, right? Putting increased crit rate or crit damage on your allies is really strong ability. You want that up for the full fight, but it's a 4-turn cooldown. Most of the time, the buff extensions are great because they work on 3-turn cooldowns with 3-turn duration speed champions, right? So you can go at 2-1 ratios. I don't know that that's going to be great here, right? Unless we can fully extend the debuffs all the time, or the buffs all the time, this becomes less good because it's just the timing of things isn't going to be synced up right. You're going to have to prioritize the A2 skill, and the A3 is going to come willy-nilly. It's just not going to be great. So anyway, he's, I think, a very solid champion, somebody I'm excited to try out, and I think you can find some interesting builds with him. I do not think he's going to be a meta one, but I do think he's pretty interesting here. So, it's a cool thing. He's definitely, for an epic, I think definitely a good addition to the game, because it's going to give you this, a new champion that can do buff extension, but also bring something a little bit different to the table, so you can really pick and choose what's going to be best for your team. If you only have like 1 or 2 really strong hitting champions, he could be a really good addition for that type of a squad, and that's where I think his strength is really going to come in. Okay, guys, those are the 8 new champions that we had. I think they're all pretty interesting, right? The epics are a little bit disappointing. There's, a couple that I'm not a real huge fan of, but a couple that are pretty solid. And I think, honestly, when we get new champions, that's kind of how it's supposed to be, right? They're not all supposed to be OP. And a couple of them have some interesting uses. Now, the legendaries, I think, are actually pretty interesting. And this fusion, I think, is going to be solid. I don't really see much in the way of bad legendaries out of this group. In general, they're all pretty solid. A couple of them are actually really, really nice. I'm very excited to try Theodore. I'm very excited to try Snickrak. And obviously the fusion champion, I think, is going to be a really strong one as well. Probably not a game-changing one, but definitely somebody, worth investing in if you have the resources to do so. So Lanotharil, I think, is actually pretty solid little champion. And Raqqa is kind of interesting. Void champion, I would probably rank her without, fully testing. I would probably rank her as one of the weaker Void champions right now. But definitely has some solid usage in this game. Not weak, just weaker. And also, I think if that holds, I'm pretty sure Plarium will end up, improving her kit to make it more commensurate with everybody else. They've done that with Noble. They've done that with a bunch of other champions so far. I'm pretty sure that she'll end up being on that list. Same thing with like Visix. So there is definitely some potential for her to get a little buff in the future. So anyway, yeah, I think some really, really interesting champions that are coming into the game. I'm excited to give them a shot here and try them out in a couple different areas and show you guys those results. So anyway, guys, thank you for sticking around. I really do appreciate it. If you have a moment and you don't mind, hit that subscribe button. Until next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.